Hi, everybody. So these are going to be our speciation notes. If you the notes of these are just going to be linked straight in our class. So if you want to not watch the video, you could do that, or maybe you could just use this video, pause it, and scan through and just get the notes there. And then if you want me to talk, if you want to hear me talk, just unpause it. Okay, so here's the idea, right? If all the organisms on this planet evolved from one organism that started life, right? Why don't we all look like that one thing? Like, let's say it was a crab. Why aren't we all just like smaller versions of a crab or bigger versions of a crab or orange crab, right? How did we get squirrels and deer and dogs and trees and oak trees and cottonwood trees and things like that? This is what we're going to talk about, speciation. So the first thing we need to know, I'm going to have to talk fast because the video can only be 5 minutes. So go ahead and pause it when you need to. Species is a group of similar organisms that can breed and produce fertile offspring. So the common, a good example of this is you have lions and you have tigers. You can mate them together to create something called a liger. Yes, ligers are real. However, ligers can't have children of their own. So if you have a male liger and a female liger and they mate, the offspring won't survive, right? They'll be stillborn, or the pregnancies will be terminated early. They won't survive. Okay. Speciation, that's how you say that second word, that's how you form new species. So here's the meat of the unit. So we have this idea, speciation. How do we get different species of something if everything evolved from itself? There's 3 methods. So go ahead and pause the video really quick and write these 3 down, and then I'll talk about them. Okay, the first one is behavioral isolation. So species are caused by or caused when a species no longer interbreeds. So it's all about reproduction, that they don't interbreed with each other, right? So the red squirrel and the gray squirrel, they don't interbreed with each other. So they're now considered individual species. So what causes an organism not to continue to breed with each other? Well, here they are. So the first one is behavioral. So if their mating patterns aren't the same, they're not going to recognize each other as viable mates. So let's say the gray squirrel likes to chase its mate around, and they play a game of catch, and that's how they form that bond. And let's say maybe the red squirrel likes to sit and chat at each other, and that's how they create those bonds. If a red squirrel tries to chat with a gray squirrel, they're not going to recognize them as compatible partners, and they're not going to try to mate with each other. So that's behavioral isolation. They're not going to mate, so they're 2 separate species. Another thing that can cause a different species is geographic. This is probably the easiest one to remember, and we'll look at some examples in a second. This is probably the easiest one to remember because it's just geographic separation. So this is like a mountain range or a river that just separates the two. So they're only mating with each other. And then as one starts to change, the other one won't change because they're not getting those changes. The DNA is not crossing over, right? There's no mixing of that DNA. And then the last one is temporal isolation. Temporal isolation is if they're looking for mates at different times of the year. So this is a good example is white-tailed deer. They mate in the fall so that they have their babies in the spring. If a male deer is looking for a female in the spring, the female is not going to be looking for a mate until the fall. So at different times, they're not going to meet up. So let's take a look at a couple examples. Okay, the first example here is what kind of speciation is this? So we have a Abert squirrel and a kebab squirrel. Sorry, they're separated by the river. So they start to look a little bit different, even though they do look still a little bit similar. They're going to be different species because even if you brought them together, there would be certain things that they wouldn't mate together. Next example is cicadas breed every 13 years, and there's a different type of cicada that breeds every 17. They're not going to be looking for mates at the right time, so they're not going to breed together. So that would be temporal isolation. And lastly, this is the eastern and western meadowlark. They have different songs, different mating songs. So when they're calling out to find a mate, their songs are different. And so they're not going to recognize each other. So they're not going to try to mate.